just be with our inner lives. This is true with children, it's true with adolescents, and it's true with us as adults.
And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that going within would require us to have some level of willingness to feel feelings. And a lot of the feelings, like anger, despair, sadness, frustration, these are deemed negative or bad feelings. These are the feelings we're not supposed to feel. And in my experience, the only emotion that is bottomless is joy. So for me, going within, it's not my favorite thing. I kick and scream like anyone else I know. But there's usually a payoff for it. And I think a lot of what's happening in this sort of distraction age, if we can call it that, is that we're running from ourselves in a way. Because there's these existential questions of who are we spiritually, who are we emotionally, are we our past? There's a lot of trauma that we've all endured and experienced that we don't necessarily have maybe an understanding or a consistent practice with which to address it. So there's also that aspect of why we love distractions so much.
So those distractions, in a way, if you label them as a kind of certainty, you know if you turn on the television, certain things are going to happen. So it's certain. You know if you're going to focus on even things that feel out of control, like your email, at least it's certain it's going to make you feel out of control. But you're going to keep on doing it.
There's a predictability.
It's predictable, but when you go inward for time in, as you're saying, it's a whole different ballgame. And coming to embrace and in fact thrive with uncertainty is really the path that I think challenges people. But in terms of what we're talking about at lunch, the shift in the culture, because for me, from an academic point of view and a clinical point of view, and even in the field of education, I think people are realizing that the life that we've been living is, as you pointed out in Thrive, is just not working. But that's going to require for us to go inward to a place that for some people is very frightening and they avoid it, but it's certainly full of uncertainty.
And to go inward requires a level of trust and faith, whether it be in God or in life or in each other, in our own selves, in our own ideally developed inner parent enough to be able to go within and inquire and find some of the answers that might be a little scary. And to have this holistic inquiry and experience of spirit. I think sometimes the spiritual sort of community in some ways invites us to almost transcend the challenging before it's sort of developmentally time to do that in a sense. So for me, it's about inquiring into our pasts and to our, what we've made life mean, what we've made our own selves mean, what we've made society mean, and accessing spirit and connection. So within oneself, intrapersonally, interpersonally, which is so exciting. Can I just say we're obsessed with how relationship is becoming more important in society?
I was going to say, the way Alanis and I met was in a nonprofit organization called Relationships First, which is all about trying to open the cultural conversation about relationships.
And what would the planet look like if we were to prioritize a relationship above finance, above professional success, so to speak, above above anything, frankly, above careers? What would the planet look like? What would our value system look like?
In other ways, to redefine what we call success now, which is not really working for many, even successful people.
Right, and as the feminist movement has now segued, and not just the feminist movement in terms of women, but the movement of the feminine becoming more of the divine charge now, we're moving into a place where post-autonomy, remember it was really hip to be independent?
Right.
And that was a mandatory link in the chain of our evolution, but we're in a place now where we're realizing that interdependence and partnership is the only way to have solutions for what we see in the world that's not working for us.
So can I build on that?
Of course.
So perfect, the people interview themselves, right?
So tell me, what is it? I want to come back to what you asked us about. The first part was like, what's changing in the culture?
Yeah.
And I'll just give you a little example. From the research on...
I can give you yeah, can do that.
Oh, go ahead.
Subtle?
Yeah, seriously.
We're such an under-touched society.
Like an event.
We can model it. Touch each other.
All right.
Yeah.
So, any requests?
A really good reflexology.
Oh my God! This is great.
Sorry. Okay,
So,
sorry.
As you were.
So culturally, I'm trained as an attachment researcher, where we study the way parents interact with children. And I wrote one academic textbook, and then with my daughter's preschool director, in fact, you were at that preschool, Mary Hartzell, and our kids were in school at the same time. We wrote a book called Parenting from the Inside Out, and no publisher in New York wanted to buy that book, because the book requires that you go inward and examine your history, the feelings of the past, times when you may not have been in control of things as a child and were dependent on other people. 24 publishers here in New York rejected it, and we said why. And
How's
they
that
said,
not in this room?
We're sorry.
there's one of them.
We're lost.
But they said, look, they said, the American public, they literally said, each of them said the same thing. The American public does not want to look inward at their history, just tell them what to do with their kid. But the research showed just the opposite, that it's your self-understanding that's the best predictor of how your child will be attached to you, which goes on to predict all sorts of resilience and thriving in your child.
And your capacity to maintain and form intimate relationships as adults later. So this whole attachment conversation is about the child and their stages of development in the beginning of it. But it also correlates directly, and Sue Johnson speaks a lot about this too, correlates to how we are in our marriages, in our partnerships, in our friendships. Anything that is committed and intimate is, sort of dictates the degree of healing that's available. And we are talking about wanting to heal as a culture from the inside out. So the attachment conversation, to me, if there were to be one thing that I would be happy about contributing as part of the larger conversation that's going on, is to really focus on how attachment affects everything in our lives.
And this is, so in terms of the question of what's changed in culture, in 2002, when we submitted the book, everyone said, no, don't go inward. And there were basically no studies on mindfulness then. No one knew about this attachment finding. It's actually your self-understanding.
And if you were doing it, you were shamed.
Yeah,
I don't know what
you're ashamed and you feel that. But now, 12 years later, the conversation is totally different. The publishers are eager to get books like that. The Brainstorm book.
Bestseller list.
Yeah, the Brainstorm book is all about an adolescent and the adolescent's parent going inward, and yeah, it did okay, but it did
Great.
So this is like, so in terms of your question, in the last 12 years things have changed. I think in the last 3 years, people are so hungry for some support to go inward, to take time in. It's a nice word just to say doing that. And when you do that, actually, it grows the circuits in your brain of resilience. It actually allows you to become more integrated in, not only within your nervous system, but actually with other people. It actually increases the capacity for compassion and empathy.
It's so interesting because, we talk a lot about outer space, and we're all fascinated by exploring outer space, Venus and Mars. But I'm so much more fascinated about exploring inner space because I feel, whether we're believers or not, it's like unknown territory. There's so much to learn, and it's so much about the mystery of it.
And we're pulled so far away from it in our lives now. There's so much incoming that I think people could go years without looking inward. And explain to us, I think we're all in a pretty good place right now. I am.
She breathed, meditated, and did yoga.
And took her shoes off.
Breathing is amazing. And I
I have confiscated her smartphone.
I don't know where it is. Lost it. Does anyone know where it is? But I actually have a serious question about it because I think we do have some reporters in the room, and they're usually very cynical people, and they're hardened, and they're out in the world and they're seeing things, and they're thinking, well, what's this about Thrive? So
I just want to say the cynical is a protection against the vulnerability of being open, right?
Okay, so what's not flaky about this? And I'm serious.
Okay. Well, I can tell you,
Yeah, I can tell you.
just to give you a little example, just a little example. When I went to medical school in the late 70s, my professors of medicine treated people like they were just objects, bags of chemicals. And I ended up dropping out of school because I didn't want to become that kind of physician.
Right.
When I went back, I made up this word that you mentioned, mindsight,
Right.
or a process whereby you see the internal subjective experience of someone else or of yourself. And it helped me go back to school. Now, 25 years after I dropped out and came back, that same medical school, which is the Research Institute, asked me to come back and give a keynote address about why emotions and narratives were so important in medicine. And we now know, just to give you an example of a study in terms of what's not flaky about it, if you're a physician and you have a patient coming to you with, let's say, a common cold, if you just say, okay, it looks like you have a runny nose or a fever, I think you have a common cold, take this, goodbye. Or you're a physician who just spends like 30 seconds saying, you're a student, aren't you? And this is you know, the end of May and it's final exam time. This must be really hard to have a common cold when you're studying. That's really hard. Here, take this and do this.
Empathy.
When you have empathy, the research is very clear. As a patient, when you're just spending 10 minutes, if I were that empathic person giving you 30 seconds of empathy, your immune system would be better. You would get over the cold a day sooner.
That's incredible.
It's incredible, but it's research proven. This idea that Ariana is really trying to bring forward in Thrive about going inward is not flaky. The mind, even though it's about subjective experience and going inward, what I call internal education, is something we may not be able to measure and put in a test tube, but it's completely real. And that's why for me,